Good evening, dear travellers, and welcome back to Snug as a Bug. I am Adam, and we are about to journey into the legendary realm of Middle-earth, where tales of love and courage live on forever in the songs of the Elves. Tonight, our path takes us first to a glade of moonlight and shadow, where an immortal elf maiden named Lúthien encounters the brave mortal Beren. Together, they face trials that defy even the gods in a love story that echoes through the ages. Then we'll walk through the gates of the hidden city of Gondolin, a place of unparalleled beauty and strength, destined to become a beacon of hope, until the forces of darkness uncover its secret and the city faces its tragic end. But before we begin, allow yourself to step into a realm beyond the boundaries of time, a place where ancient forests and mist-shrouded mountains hold the secrets of ages long past. The air around you feels different, filled with the fragrance of pine and earth, and a distant whisper of elven song that echoes softly through the trees. This is Middle-earth, a land of beauty and mystery, where every forest glade and river's edge tells a story etched into the very fabric of the land. You walk along a forest path blanketed in soft moss, each step quieter than the last, as if the forest itself is listening. Towering trees surround you, their silver leaves shimmering in the pale light of stars overhead. The night sky stretches wide and endless, dotted with constellations that seem to tell tales of bravery, love, and loss. Stories that have been whispered here for countless generations. In the distance, the faint glimmer of a hidden elven city appears through the mist, its tall, elegant spires reaching up toward the heavens, carved from stone and silver by hands that remember the dawn of time. Somewhere beyond, rivers run clear and deep, reflecting the stars and the gentle glow of the moon as they wind their way through valleys and ancient woodlands. As you walk further, the sounds of Middle-earth enfold you. The soft rustling of leaves, the quiet song of the wind as it travels through the branches, and the distant call of a night bird echoing from a hidden perch. The land feels alive, filled with a quiet magic, a pulse of ancient power that stirs the soul. Let the wonders of Middle-earth surround you, transporting you to a place where legends breathe and dreams unfold. Here, within this timeless land, our stories await. The Tale of Lúthien and Beren. Chapter 1. A Forbidden Love is Born. In the heart of Doriath, the kingdom hidden beneath the trees of the enchanted forest, lived Lúthien. Doriath was a realm unlike any other in Middle-earth. Protected by the girdle of Melian, an invisible barrier created by Lúthien's mother, it was a place of peace and safety, where no evil could enter. The trees here were ancient, their roots intertwined with the very fabric of the world, and their branches stretched high into the heavens, their leaves shimmering silver in the starlight. On a night when the stars burned brightest, Lúthien danced in a glade deep within the forest. The nifredil, small white flowers that bloomed only in her presence, covered the ground like a blanket of snow, their petals glowing softly in the moonlight. Lúthien's hair, dark as the night sky, flowed behind her as she moved, and her laughter echoed through the trees, as light and free as the wind. She danced not for an audience, but for the sheer joy of it, her movements as fluid and graceful as the rivers that wound through the forest. The night seemed to watch her, the stars twinkling as if in rhythm with her steps. The trees swayed gently, their leaves rustling in time with the soft music of her laughter. And yet she was not alone. Hidden in the shadows of the trees stood Beren, a mortal man. He had wandered long and far, his journey filled with hardship and loss. His homeland, the once beautiful land of Dorthonion, had been ravaged by the forces of Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, and Beren had been forced to flee. For many months he had travelled through the wilderness, his heart heavy with grief, his body weary from the endless trials he had faced. Beren had lost everything, his family, his friends, his home. He had known nothing but sorrow and pain for so long that he had begun to believe that joy was something he would never feel again. But then he had stumbled upon this glade, and his life had changed in an instant. He had been drawn to the sound of her laughter, a sound so pure and full of life that it seemed to chase away the shadows that had long clouded his heart. And when he saw her, dancing beneath the stars, her hair shining like the night itself, her eyes filled with the light of 1,000 stars, he knew that he had found something worth fighting for. No, more than that, something worth living for. Beren watched her from the shadows, his breath catching in his throat. Never before had he seen such beauty, such grace. She moved as if she were a part of the night itself, her feet barely touching the ground as she spun and twirled. The flowers seemed to bloom in her wake, the air itself shimmering with magic. For a long moment, Beren was content to simply watch, to drink in the sight of her, to let the joy she radiated fill the empty spaces within his heart. But as he stood there, a thought crept into his mind. What if this was all a dream? What if he had finally succumbed to the weariness of his journey, and this vision of beauty was nothing more than a fleeting illusion? He couldn't bear the thought of losing her, of waking to find that she was nothing more than a figment of his imagination. And so, with his heart pounding in his chest, Beren stepped forward, his footfall barely audible in the soft grass. The leaves rustled around him, and Lúthien's laughter ceased. She turned to face him, her eyes wide with surprise, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. The air was still, the night holding its breath as the two stood facing each other. Lúthien, her breath coming in soft gasps from her dancing, stared at the man before her, the man who had somehow wandered into the heart of Doriath, a place where no mortal had ever set foot. Beren's heart raced as he gazed at her, his eyes filled with wonder. He had known, from the moment he saw her, that she was no ordinary maiden. Her beauty was otherworldly, her presence radiant with a light that seemed to come from within. She was an elf, he realized, one of the firstborn, the children of Ilúvatar, untouched by time and death. And yet, despite the vast gulf between them, between mortal and immortal, Beren felt a pull, a connection, as if their fates had been intertwined long before they had ever laid eyes on each other. "I have watched you from afar," Beren said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper, "and I could not turn away." Lúthien's heart quickened at his words, her breath catching in her throat. She had never seen a mortal before, had never felt the presence of one so close. And yet there was something in Beren's eyes, something deep and sorrowful, that spoke to her in a way she could not explain. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The night seemed to close in around them, the stars above shining down like silent witnesses to the moment unfolding below. And then, slowly, a smile spread across Lúthien's face, and the tension in the air melted away. From that night on, Beren and Lúthien met often in the forest. They would steal away under the cover of darkness, their meetings hidden from the eyes of Lúthien's father, King Thingol, and the people of Doriath. They walked hand in hand beneath the trees, their hearts light with the joy of each other's company. Lúthien would sing songs of old, her voice filling the forest with its magic, and Beren would tell her tales of his travels, of the lands he had seen and the dangers he had faced. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, their love grew stronger, deeper, like the roots of the ancient trees that surrounded them. And yet, even in their happiness, they knew that their love was not without danger. For the world of men and elves was a world divided by fate. Men were mortal, their lives brief and fleeting, like the leaves that fall in autumn, while the elves were immortal, their existence stretching across the ages. Lúthien's heart ached with the knowledge that no matter how strong their love, it would one day be tested by the cruel hand of fate. Chapter 2. A Love That Defies the Gods. Rumours of Lúthien and Beren's love began to spread, whispered among the trees and carried on the winds. At first they were nothing more than faint echoes, easily dismissed by those who heard them. But as the whispers grew louder, they eventually reached the ears of King Thingol. Thingol was a proud and powerful king, known throughout Middle-earth for his wisdom and strength. He had ruled over Doriath for many centuries, and his people revered him as a leader who had protected them from the darkness that lurked beyond the borders of their realm. His love for Lúthien, his only daughter, was deep and fierce, and he had always been determined to keep her safe from the evils of the world. When Thingol first heard the rumours of Lúthien's love for a mortal man, he dismissed them as foolishness. It was unthinkable that his daughter, the fairest of all elves, would fall in love with a man, a being whose life was but a flicker in the eternal flame of her existence. But as the rumours persisted, Thingol could no longer ignore them. One evening, as Lúthien returned to the court after one of her secret meetings with Beren, Thingol called her before him. His eyes, once filled with pride and love for his daughter, were now hard and cold. "Is it true?" Thingol demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Have you given your heart to this mortal man?" Lúthien stood tall before her father, her chin lifted in defiance. She had always been a dutiful daughter, obedient to her father's wishes, but this was different. Her love for Beren was unlike anything she had ever known, and she would not let it be taken from her. "It is true," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "I love him." Thingol's face darkened with anger. He had always been a proud king, and the thought of his daughter, the jewel of his kingdom, marrying a mortal, a man who would age and die while Lúthien remained forever young, was an insult he could not bear. "You cannot wed him," Thingol declared, his voice thundering through the great hall. "He is beneath you, Lúthien. You are an elf, and he is a man. His life is but a fleeting moment, a shadow in the light of your eternal existence." But Lúthien, her heart filled with love for Beren, refused to back down. "Love is not bound by time, nor by race," she said softly. "I love him, father, and nothing you say will change that." Thingol, realizing that he could not sway his daughter with words, devised a cruel plan. If Beren wanted to claim Lúthien's hand in marriage, he would have to prove himself. But not just any proof would suffice. Thingol demanded the impossible. "Let him bring me a Silmaril," Thingol said, a wicked gleam in his eyes. "One of the 3 jewels stolen by Morgoth, the Dark Lord, from the crown of Feanor. If he can place a Silmaril in my hand, then, and only then, will I allow you to wed him." The court fell silent, the weight of Thingol's words hanging heavy in the air. Everyone knew that the task Thingol had set before Beren was nothing short of a death sentence. The Silmarils, the most prized and powerful jewels in all of Middle-earth, had been stolen by Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, and were now locked away in his fortress of Angband. No mortal could hope to face Morgoth and live, let alone steal a Silmaril from his iron crown. But Beren, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the hall, stepped forward. His gaze was steady, his face determined. "I will bring you the Silmaril," he said, his voice unwavering. Lúthien's heart ached at the sight of him, knowing full well the dangers that lay ahead. She wanted to beg him not to go, to tell him that no jewel was worth his life. But she knew that Beren would not be swayed. His love for her was stronger than any fear, stronger even than the shadow of death. And so, Beren set out on his quest to retrieve a Silmaril from the crown of Morgoth, the most powerful and feared of all beings in Middle-earth. Chapter 3. The Perilous Quest. Beren's journey was one of great peril. He travelled far and wide, crossing vast plains, treacherous mountains and dark forests, all the while knowing that his quest might well lead to his death. Along the way, he encountered many dangers: wild beasts, cruel men, and even the minions of Morgoth, who sought to capture or kill him at every turn. The road was long and difficult, but Beren's love for Lúthien gave him the strength to continue. He thought of her often, remembering the way she danced beneath the stars, her laughter filling the air like the sweetest of melodies. It was these thoughts that kept him going, even when his body was weary and his spirit close to breaking. But Beren was not alone in his journey for long. Unbeknownst to him, Lúthien had followed him. Unable to bear the thought of him facing such dangers alone, she had slipped away from Doriath, disguising herself with a cloak woven from the magic of her mother, Melian. With this cloak, she could move unseen through the world, a shadow among shadows. When Beren learned of her presence, he was both relieved and filled with dread. He did not want Lúthien to face the dangers of Morgoth's realm, but he knew that together they stood a better chance of success. And so they continued their journey side by side, each drawing strength from the other. Their path led them to Angband, the dark fortress of Morgoth, a place of shadow and despair. The very air seemed to thicken as they approached, heavy with the weight of evil that had taken root there. The great gates of Angband loomed before them, towering high into the sky, guarded by countless creatures of darkness. But Lúthien, with her songs of power, cast a spell of sleep over the gatekeepers, allowing them to slip inside unnoticed. Deep into the bowels of Angband they crept, their hearts pounding with the fear of what awaited them. Chapter 4. The Silmaril and the Great Sacrifice. At last they reached the throne room of Morgoth, a vast and terrible place, filled with the stench of death and decay. Morgoth himself sat upon a great throne of black stone, his iron crown upon his head. The Silmarils, the jewels that had been the cause of so much pain and bloodshed, gleamed brightly upon the crown, their light a stark contrast to the darkness that surrounded them. Lúthien, her heart pounding in her chest, stepped forward. She sang a song of such beauty and sorrow that even the great Morgoth, the Dark Lord himself, was lulled into a deep slumber. The creatures that surrounded him, wolves, bats, and other foul beasts, also fell under her spell, their eyes closing as they drifted into sleep. With trembling hands, Beren approached the throne. He reached up and carefully plucked one of the Silmarils from Morgoth's crown. The jewel was warm to the touch, its light bright and pure in the darkness of Angband. But as Beren turned to leave, the iron crown shifted, and Morgoth stirred. Though still trapped in sleep, the Dark Lord's movements caused the great wolf, Carcharoth, to awaken. Carcharoth, the guardian of the Silmarils, lunged at Beren with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the fortress. In a desperate attempt to protect Lúthien, Beren raised his hand, the Silmaril shining brightly within his grasp. But Carcharoth was too swift. With a single vicious bite, the wolf tore Beren's hand from his arm, swallowing both the Silmaril and Beren's flesh. Beren collapsed to the ground, blood pouring from his wound. Lúthien rushed to his side, her heart breaking at the sight of him lying there, so pale and still. With tears streaming down her face, she called upon all her power, all her love, and together they fled Angband, though Beren's life hung by the thinnest of threads. Chapter 5. Love Beyond Death. Beren and Lúthien's journey back to Doriath was long and fraught with difficulty. Beren's wound, though bound and tended by Lúthien, continued to fester, the poison from Carcharoth's bite spreading through his body. By the time they reached the borders of Doriath, Beren was barely clinging to life. When they arrived at King Thingol's court, Lúthien fell to her knees before her father, begging him to save the man she loved. Thingol, though his heart still bore the weight of pride, was moved by the sight of his daughter's tears. He called upon Melian, his queen, to use her powers to heal Beren. With great effort, Melian restored Beren's life, but the shadow of death lingered over him still. Though he lived, his body was weakened by his ordeal, and it was clear that his time in Middle-earth was short. Beren and Lúthien spent the rest of their days together in a quiet valley far from the troubles of the world. They lived in peace, their love a beacon of hope and light in a land darkened by war and shadow. But even love cannot hold back the tide of time, and eventually Beren's life came to an end. He passed from the world, leaving Lúthien behind, her heart shattered by the loss. Unable to bear the pain of living without him, Lúthien chose to follow Beren into the halls of Mandos, the realm of the dead. There she stood before Mandos, the keeper of souls, and sang a song of such beauty and sorrow that even he, who was unmoved by the pleas of mortals, was touched. In her song, Lúthien told of her love for Beren, a love that transcended the boundaries of life and death. She spoke of the pain of losing him and the joy they had shared in their brief time together. Her voice, filled with emotion, echoed through the halls of Mandos, reaching even the ears of the Valar. Moved by her plea, Mandos granted Lúthien a rare gift. She and Beren would be allowed to return to Middle-earth, but as mortals, to live out the rest of their days together. No longer would they be bound by the laws of the elves or the doom of men. They would be free to love without the shadow of fate looming over them. And so, they were granted their second chance, not as an immortal elf and a mortal man, but as two beings bound by love that transcended the boundaries of their races, defying the very nature of time and death. Upon their return to Middle-earth, Beren and Lúthien found peace in a quiet valley, far from the kingdoms of men and elves. It was a place of rolling hills, soft meadows, and glistening rivers that reflected the light of the stars, untouched by the wars and strife that marred much of the world. Here, they built their home, a simple, humble dwelling nestled between the roots of a great oak tree, whose branches spread wide, offering shade and shelter. Lúthien, now mortal, had chosen a life that meant she, too, would one day pass from the world. But in this fleeting time, they were truly together. No longer was Beren tormented by the knowledge that his days would be short, and no longer did Lúthien fear the eternal loneliness that would have awaited her as an immortal elf. Their love, which had once seemed as fragile as the passing of the seasons, now felt eternal in its own right. As the years passed, they lived simply. Beren would hunt in the nearby woods, bringing home game to roast over their fire, while Lúthien would tend to their small garden, where flowers of all kinds bloomed, their petals vibrant with life. Lúthien's voice still held its magic, though now she sang not to enchant or mesmerize, but simply for the joy of it, her melodies filling the air around their home like a gentle breeze. In the mornings, they would walk hand in hand through the fields, dew sparkling on the grass beneath their feet. The birds would sing, their calls harmonizing with the rustling of the trees, and the sunlight would bathe the valley in a soft, golden glow. Every moment was a gift, every day a treasure, and together they found happiness in the smallest of things. The warmth of the sun on their skin, the sound of the river as it flowed past their home, the soft touch of their hands as they intertwined. But even in this peace, the memories of their trials lingered. There were nights when Beren would wake, his heart racing, the echoes of his journey to Angband haunting his dreams. He would remember the darkness of Morgoth's fortress, the overwhelming presence of the Dark Lord, and the cold, sharp pain of Karkaroth's bite. Lúthien too would wake beside him, her hand resting gently on his chest, her eyes filled with understanding. They would sit together in the quiet of the night, the firelight casting soft shadows on the walls. And in those moments, words were unnecessary. They had both faced the darkness, and together they had emerged into the light. As the seasons changed, so too did they. Their love, once passionate and filled with the fire of defiance, deepened into something more profound, an unspoken bond that needed no grand gestures or declarations. It was a love that had been forged in the fires of fate, tempered by sacrifice, and now it simply was. It existed in every shared glance, every touch, every breath they took together. It was as much a part of them as the air they breathed. And yet, even in this idyllic life, the passage of time could not be denied. Though they had been granted a second chance, they were still mortal, and the years, though filled with joy, passed swiftly. Beren, once a strong and valiant warrior, began to feel the weight of his years. His hair, once dark and thick, began to turn silver, and his limbs, once strong and sure, grew slower with time. Lúthien too felt the passage of time, though her beauty remained undimmed, her spirit as bright as ever. But neither feared the coming of the end. They had already faced death once, and they knew that their love was stronger than anything the world could throw at them. In the quiet of the night, when the stars shone brightly overhead, they would speak of their journey, of the trials they had faced, and of the future that awaited them beyond the world. "I do not fear death," Lúthien would say, her voice soft and filled with certainty. "For I know that our love will carry us through the darkness." Beren would smile, his hand resting gently on hers. "And I will wait for you," he would reply. "In whatever world lies beyond this one, I will wait for you." And so the years passed, and the time came when Beren's strength finally left him. He had lived a full and happy life, one filled with more love and joy than he had ever thought possible. As he lay in their small home, the fire crackling softly beside him, he felt no fear, only peace. Lúthien was at his side, her hand resting gently on his, her eyes filled with love and understanding. "I will find you," she whispered, her voice breaking only slightly. "I will find you again." Beren smiled, his breath coming in slow, steady beats. "I know you will," he whispered, "for nothing, not even death, can keep us apart." And with those words, Beren passed from the world, his hand still clasped in Lúthien's, his heart at peace. Chapter 6. The End and the Beginning. Lúthien remained in the valley for many years after Beren's passing, her heart filled with both sorrow and love. She walked the paths they had once walked together, her voice no longer filled with the laughter and joy of her youth, but with a quiet, unshakable resolve. She had known from the moment she chose to follow Beren into the halls of Mandos that their time together in Middle-earth would be fleeting. But she had never regretted her choice, not for a single moment. As the years wore on, Lúthien grew weary of the world. The valley, once filled with the light and warmth of their love, now felt empty without Beren by her side. The flowers still bloomed, the birds still sang, but the joy they had once brought her was now tinged with the ache of loss. One night, as she sat by the river, watching the stars reflected in the water, Lúthien made her decision. She had lived a mortal life, had loved and lost, and now she was ready to follow Beren once more, into whatever world awaited them beyond the one they had known. She rose from her seat by the river, her heart light with the knowledge that she would soon be reunited with the man she had loved more than life itself. And so, under the stars that had witnessed their love from the very beginning, Lúthien closed her eyes and let her spirit drift away, carried on the gentle breeze of the night. As her body fell still, her soul soared, carried beyond the confines of the world into the halls of Mandos, where Beren waited for her. They were reunited once more, their spirits entwined in a love that no longer knew the boundaries of time or space. Together, they passed into the unknown, their hearts filled with peace and the certainty that their love had truly conquered all. The Fall of Gondolin. Chapter 1. The Hidden City in the Mountains. In the long years after the world was first shaped, Middle-earth stood as a land of great beauty and peril, with towering mountains, deep forests, and rivers that wound their way across the lands like veins of silver. But in those times, a shadow darker than the night began to spread from the north. Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, sought dominion over all creation. From his fortress of Angband, Morgoth's malice touched every corner of the world, twisting creatures, men, and even the hearts of some elves to his dark will. Yet amidst the growing darkness, there were still places of refuge, havens untouched by Morgoth's evil. One such place was Gondolin, the hidden city of the Elves, nestled in a secret valley in the encircling mountains. Gondolin was a city of unparalleled beauty and strength, its tall white towers gleaming in the sunlight, its streets lined with trees that bore golden fruit. The Elves of Gondolin, led by their king Turgon, lived in peace and safety, hidden from the eyes of their enemies by the enchantments that protected the valley from discovery. For years, Gondolin remained hidden, a jewel of light in a darkening world. Its people were skilled craftsmen, building walls and weapons of such beauty and strength that they were said to be the envy of even the Valar, the godlike beings who had shaped the world. The walls of the city were tall and thick, and its gates, made of silver and steel, were guarded night and day by the bravest of Turgon's warriors. But Gondolin's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness, its secrecy. The city's location was known to only a few, and Turgon, in his wisdom, forbade his people from leaving the valley for fear that they would be followed and the city's secret would be revealed. And so the people of Gondolin lived in isolation, their lives filled with peace and beauty, but always with the shadow of Morgoth looming over the distant mountains. Chapter 2. A Visitor from the Outside World. For many years, the people of Gondolin knew nothing of the wars and struggles that raged beyond their valley. The world outside was distant, a memory faded by time, and the Elves of Gondolin lived as though the dark tides of Morgoth's power could never touch them. But all of that began to change when a stranger arrived at the gates of Gondolin, a mortal man named Tuor. Tuor was a man of great strength and courage, though his life had been marked by hardship. Born in the lands of Nevrast, his family had been driven from their homes by Morgoth's forces, and Tuor had spent much of his life wandering the wilderness, alone and hunted. But even in his darkest moments, Tuor was guided by fate, for the Valar had chosen him for a special purpose. Guided by the sea god Ulmo, Tuor made his way through the dangerous lands of Middle-earth, following the call of destiny. He journeyed through desolate forests, across freezing rivers, and over treacherous mountain paths, always following the voice that whispered in his heart, the voice of Ulmo, the Lord of Waters, who had chosen Tuor as his messenger. At last, after many trials, Tuor came to the hidden valley of Gondolin. As he stood before the towering walls of the city, he marveled at its beauty, for never before had he seen such a sight. The white towers gleamed in the sunlight, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of flowers. But as he gazed upon the city, Tuor felt a deep sense of foreboding, for he knew that the peace of Gondolin could not last forever. When the guards at the gates saw Tuor, they were amazed, for no mortal man had ever found their city before. But they knew that his arrival was not by chance. The Valar had sent him, and though the people of Gondolin had long lived in isolation, they could not ignore the will of the gods. Tuor was brought before Turgon, the king of Gondolin, who listened carefully to his words. Tuor told the king of his journey, of the voice of Ulmo that had guided him, and of the message he had been sent to deliver. "Ulmo has sent me to warn you," Tuor said, his voice solemn. "Morgoth grows stronger with each passing day, and though Gondolin is hidden from his eyes, it will not remain so forever. Ulmo bids you to leave this city, to take your people and flee before the darkness falls." Turgon listened in silence, his face grave. For many years he had feared this day would come, but the beauty and peace of Gondolin had lulled him into a sense of security. To leave Gondolin, to abandon the city he had built with his own hands, seemed unthinkable. But Tuor's words stirred something deep within the king's heart. Ulmo was one of the greatest of the Valar, and his counsel could not be ignored. Yet Turgon was torn. Could he truly abandon the city he loved? Could he leave behind the only home his people had ever known? Chapter 3. A Prophecy Ignored. Though Tuor had delivered Ulmo's message faithfully, King Turgon struggled with his decision. Gondolin had been a refuge for so long, a place untouched by the wars and sorrows of the outside world. Its walls were strong, its warriors brave. Surely it could withstand whatever darkness Morgoth might send against them. And so, though Tuor remained in Gondolin, Turgon chose to ignore the warning. He believed in the strength of his city, in the enchantments that protected the valley, and in the wisdom of his people. But what Turgon did not know was that fate was already at work. Unseen forces were moving against him, and Gondolin's doom was closer than he could have imagined. Among the people of Gondolin was a man named Maeglin, the nephew of King Turgon. Maeglin was a skilled craftsman and warrior, known for his intelligence and ambition. But Maeglin's heart was darkened by jealousy and unrequited love, for he had long desired Idril, the daughter of Turgon, though she did not return his affections. Maeglin's envy festered within him, twisting his loyalty into bitterness. It was this bitterness that Morgoth would one day use to destroy Gondolin. For though Gondolin remained hidden from the eyes of Morgoth, Maeglin's treachery would soon reveal the city's secret. In a fateful encounter with Morgoth's spies, Maeglin was captured while searching for ores in the mountains surrounding Gondolin. Faced with torture and death, Maeglin betrayed his people. He revealed the location of Gondolin to Morgoth, promising the Dark Lord that he would help lead his forces to the city in exchange for power, and for Idril. Chapter 4. The Siege of Gondolin. The attack came on a night like no other. The sky was black, save for the cold, distant stars, and a stillness had settled over the valley of Gondolin, as if the world itself were holding its breath. But in the shadows beyond the encircling mountains, Morgoth's forces were gathering, an army of orcs, balrogs and dragons, led by Morgoth's most trusted lieutenants. They moved silently through the night, their eyes gleaming with malice, their hearts filled with the lust for destruction. The people of Gondolin, unaware of the impending danger, slept peacefully in their beds, their minds filled with dreams of beauty and light. But those dreams were soon shattered by the sound of horns, deep, mournful blasts that echoed through the streets, shaking the very walls of the city. The attack had begun. Flames erupted from the mountainsides as Morgoth's forces poured into the valley, their dark banners fluttering in the night wind. Dragons, their scales glistening with fire, led the charge, their breath scorching the earth as they advanced toward the city. Behind them came the orcs, thousands upon thousands of them, their swords and spears gleaming in the firelight, their cries of battle filling the air. The warriors of Gondolin, led by Turgon and Tuor, rallied to defend their city, their hearts filled with the courage of their ancestors. The walls of Gondolin were tall and strong, and the gates were made of the finest steel, but even these could not hold against the full might of Morgoth's army. The battle raged through the night and into the dawn, the sky ablaze with the fire of dragons and the smoke of burning towers. The streets of Gondolin, once filled with music and laughter, now ran red with blood, and the walls that had once stood so proudly were crumbling beneath the relentless assault. Tuor fought bravely, his sword flashing in the firelight as he struck down enemy after enemy. But despite his best efforts, he could not stem the tide of destruction. The city was falling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. In the midst of the chaos, Meglin sought to claim his prize. He cornered Idril in her father's palace, intending to take her for himself as he had promised Morgoth. But Idril was no helpless maiden, and with the help of her young son, Erendil, she fought back. In the struggle, Meglin was thrown from the walls of Gondolin, his body falling into the flames below. But even as Meglin fell, the city continued to burn. Chapter 5. The Escape. As the city of Gondolin crumbled around them, Idril and Tuor knew that their only hope was to flee. With a small group of survivors, they made their way through the secret tunnels beneath the city, tunnels that Idril had wisely ordered built long ago, fearing that Gondolin's peace could not last forever. The tunnels wound through the mountains, dark and narrow, but they provided a safe passage out of the city. As they fled, the sounds of battle grew distant, replaced by the steady drip of water and the quiet shuffle of their footsteps on the stone floor. Behind them, Gondolin burned. The white towers, once so proud, were now nothing more than heaps of rubble, and the streets that had once echoed with the laughter of children were now filled with the cries of the dying. But even in the midst of this destruction there was hope, for Idril and Tuor, along with their son Erendil, carried with them the legacy of Gondolin, a legacy that would one day shape the fate of Middle-earth. As they emerged from the tunnels, the survivors looked back at their city one last time. The flames still raged, lighting up the night sky like a second dawn, but there was no going back. Gondolin was lost. But though the city had fallen, its spirit lived on in those who had escaped. They would carry the memory of Gondolin with them, and through their descendants, the hope of the elves and men would endure. Chapter 6. The Legacy of Gondolin. The survivors of Gondolin made their way to the mouths of Sirion, where they established a new refuge. There they lived in peace for many years, raising their children and rebuilding their lives. But the memory of Gondolin was never far from their hearts, and the pain of its loss lingered in their minds like a shadow. Yet from this tragedy, a new hope would one day arise. Erendil, the son of Tuor and Idril, grew into a strong and wise leader, beloved by both elves and men, and it was through him that the final chapter of Middle-earth's first age would be written. For Erendil would one day sail to the land of the Valar, seeking their aid in the battle against Morgoth. And through his efforts, the forces of good would finally triumph over the Dark Lord, bringing an end to the long years of darkness. The fall of Gondolin was a tragedy, but it was not the end. From the ashes of the city a new light was born, a light that would shine for all the ages to come.